know, we often talk on this show about political revolutions, but tonight we'll meet someone who's at the forefront of a revolution that's much more personal, a revolution in the way people think and the way they behave.
Far-left Democrats appear to be weaponizing political correctness against President Trump to gain political leverage. However, some say the PC pandemic poses a far greater challenge.
Americans, the number of Americans on psychiatric medication is rising, but so is the suicide rate. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that antidepressants have a role. They have a place when it comes to addressing depression, and there are a lot of folks who have benefited from them. But there's a big but here, which is that I think that we have been, over time, probably over-prescribing these medicines and not looking carefully for alternatives and for other ways to address people's depression, not really looking deeply at the causes of what's driving their depression.
Well, that's it right there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you'd think when the suicide rate spikes, and it has, measurably, that we would have a national conversation about why. What do you think the cause is?
Well, I don't think there's one single cause, but I think there's one particular cause that's contributing to depression that I don't think we talk about enough, and that is social disconnection, that is loneliness. And when I began my tenure as Surgeon General, if you had told me that I would be thinking about and talking about loneliness as much as I have, I would have told you you're absolutely wrong.
If you could grasp belief, what would constitute a credible belief? What would it mean for a belief to be credible? And I can give you a hint about that. I learned this from Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, brilliant theorist, a genuine genius. He was interested in how children organized games. And he thought of games, the organization of games by children, as the precursor to adult interaction. And he made some very interesting observations about games, especially pretend games, which are quite sophisticated, because children will get together and play pretend games, and what they'll do is they act out a simulation of the world. Maybe they play house. They all get together and they cast each other in different roles. And then they each act out those roles, and they do that in order to simulate something important that they're going to have to adapt to. But Piaget noted a couple of things. The first thing he noted was that children playing games can play the games in a group. Thank you very much. Can play a game in a group, but if you take them out of the group and you ask them what the rules of the game are, they don't know. They can't articulate the rules of the game. Yet, when you put them together in the group, they can play the game. And I thought, oh, that's just like adults.
This is a country that continues to oppress communities of color, LGBTQIA communities, Muslims, and those they deem to be the other.
Advocates of political correctness claim the main goal of PC is to protect the vulnerable and oppressed by promoting inclusiveness, diversity and multiculturalism. But in reality, some have said PC has taken heavy toll on First Amendment rights, claiming it has crippled the language, topics of discussion and decision-making in America's social and political life.
Which is that all of us now walk around, or nearly all of us walk around with phones, with smartphones that give us immediate access to email, to text messaging. Now that can be incredibly convenient. I have a smartphone and I use it and it's very, very helpful. But that phone and our devices can also creep into other parts of our lives. Yeah. They can come to the dinner table with us and impact the quality of the conversations we have with our family. They can show up on the table at a restaurant when we're trying to catch up with a friend and instead end up being distracted by the messages that are popping up on our screen. So we have found that our phones and work more broadly has crept into our evenings, weekends, and vacation time, and that has actually taken away from our time with family and with close friends.
Political correctness was designed by far-left ideologists of the past century to advance a global proletarian revolution which would lead the mankind from capitalist injustices through socialist reforms toward a bright future. And in the Stalinist Soviet Union, political correctness became a tool of political repressions, populating the labor camps of Gulag with tens of millions of those who disagree with the general line of the party. The US imported the concept of political correctness in the 1970s when left-wing intellectuals, including then-graduate student Hillary Clinton, embraced the idea of putting equality above liberty. And it's hardly surprising, as some believe PC became the dominant public narrative during the presidency of her husband, Bill Clinton.
And we listen to them and say, yeah, probably it's true. Is it true? No, it is not true. Violence is not justified. especially for the sake of quote-unquote social justice introduced by Marxist-Leninism.
Ever since the 1990s, the ideas of social justice, fairness and redistribution of wealth have become a new normality in America's public discourse.
There's a lot of suffering in life, and it's often contaminated by malevolence, because we can take a bad situation for us and our families and our communities and certainly do everything we can to make it worse. And so there's a dark element to life, and in order to be able to sustain yourself through that properly, you have to find something that's deeply meaningful. And you have an instinct for meaning. I mean, I think you can make a strong case for that neurologically. And the instinct for meaning helps you find a pathway through life that enables you to find engagement, a rich engagement that can help you thrive in the face of the difficulty of life.
In such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic.
The globalist left appears to be using PC narratives in order to reach out to as many demographic groups they can, including Muslims, women and LGBT communities, in order to boost its influence in the society. And there is the speculation the purpose of such activity is to dismantle individual nation-states and promote globalism through identity politics and victimhood among various demographics. All this to supposedly discredit and destroy free market economics, property rights and the rule of law.
We have to get much smarter, and we have to get much less politically correct. We're so politically correct that we're afraid to do anything.
Critics of PC ideas have warned socialist policies could eventually turn the US into a failed state, with the majority of its citizens dependent on miserable wages and welfare handouts as their only source of income.
When they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people.
All this suggests PC reaches far beyond public conversations, inflicting deep and irreversible division and hostility within Western societies. Whether this new globalist project eventually comes into life remains to be seen.
This is the deepest idea of mankind. It's developed in detail in Genesis, in the Old Testament. It's the fundamental idea of Genesis, that God uses the Logos, the Word of God, to cast potential, which we all face. That's what we face, potential, right? You know that. You know that. The future is unstructured. You have a potential within you that can meet that, and there's a potential that characterizes the future. You meet it with eyes open and with truthful speech. And that's what happens in Genesis, because God uses the Logos, which is truthful speech, to cast the pre-cosmogonic potential into habitable order. And then he says it's good. And there's a hint there, right? Because you think, well, is habitable order good? Because life is very difficult. And it's a real question whether or not the order that we inhabit is good. And the hypothesis in the Old Testament is that if truthful speech gives rise to the order, then that order will be good. And that's really something, man. That's really something to apprehend. It's a fundamental theological presupposition that the way that you take the potential upon which the cosmos is predicated and cast it into the order that allows everyone to thrive is by using truthful speech. Wouldn't it be something if that was the case? And the thing is, you know it's the case. You know it. You know it. Because you do not admire yourself if you're deceitful. You admire yourself when you have those rare moments in your life where you can actually stand up and say what's true, regardless of the cost. And if you give that respect to other people, if you treat them as if they're the locale of the divine speech that casts potential into habitable order, then they like you. Maybe they even love you and they get along with you, and you can work with them and you can cooperate with them and you can compete with them. So not only is it the fundamental axiom that regulates your relationship with yourself, it's the fundamental axiom that regulates your interactions with other people. And if you do not give them that honor, which is the presupposition for their natural right? Because the idea that you have a natural right is the idea that you have some sort of intrinsic value. If you don't treat people as if they have that intrinsic right, they are not happy with you, even if they don't know why. Because everyone wants to be treated as if they have free will, and as if they confront potential, and as if they're capable of making moral choices, and that they should be rewarded when they do things right, and perhaps punished when they do things wrong. Everyone wants that, and everyone knows it. And so, well, so what does that all have to do with free speech? Well, yes, everything. That's exactly right. So